Right. Okay, it should be a good week. It's a week of rejoicing and seeing past the rainy, nasty weather to the propitious time it is for the Jewish people in terms of celebrating Purim. You could already start reading the Megillah today, as the Mishnah says. So this week, we're going to take a look at both the holiday of Purim, which the Megillah is read worldwide on Thursday night and Friday morning, even in the city of Yerushalayim. So it's a rare, because it's on a Friday, we're actually reading the Megillah, all of us on the same time, even though in Yerushalayim, certain mitzvahs like the Suda will spill over till Sunday. But reading the Megillah, we're all going to do together. The title of this class is What Matters. And what matters is a big issue, because we talk a lot about being subject to the views of others, subject to the worldview of the Jewish people, subject to many things. So we're going to give a little time to look at first Megillat Esther itself, the book of Esther, which is a standalone book of the Bible, actually the last one that was included in the 24 books of the Bible, of the Tanakh. And then we're going to play it off against the Parsha. So if I ask you a question about the Purim story, who are the characters in the Purim story? So a couple of people I see are still unmuted. Talk up. Who are the characters? Who have named the top 3, 4, 5, 6 characters of the story?
Mordechai, Haman, Esther, the king Ahasuerus, and not God because he's not mentioned.
Okay, well that's a big statement there. That's a big statement. Okay, so first of all, I want to respectfully disagree.
Disagree. And
I want to say that the first words of the Megillah eliminate one of the characters you mentioned. And this is an innovative explanation, but it bears our attention. Vayehi bimei Achashverosh. And it happened during the times of Achashverosh. Now, that seems like a very superfluous statement if he really is a character in the story, right? That would almost be like me if I was writing a book saying this happened in the times when there was a God. Just to pick a bone with your comment. Because in other words,
I was just being facetious.
I'm really being I'm in the spirit of Purim jousting with you.
Yeah.
So what the Megillah is saying like this, the Megillah should have really started. It shouldn't have started with these words that happened in the days of Achashverosh. Achashverosh was the king over 127 provinces, and he threw a party, and everybody came to the party in the city of Shushan, the capital city. It should just start saying Achashverosh ruled over 127 provinces, countries, however you want to translate it. And he threw a party. The fact that the Megillah goes out of its way to say this happened in the times of Achashverosh is hinting at something. And it's hinting at the idea, don't make the mistake of thinking that Achashverosh shaped or even impacted the events that took place. Okay, this is an audacious interpretation, but let's give it a little thought. What is the story? Achashverosh became the king. He threw a big party in Shushan. Everybody came, including the Jewish people. We know by tradition, because it talks about the utensils he used, that the party was to celebrate the fact that the Jewish people were never going to return back to the land of Israel, as the prophets had prophesied in the time of the first temple, which had been destroyed somewhere about 55 years before. So he threw a big party. The Jewish people joined in the party. Mordechai didn't. Some of the leaders didn't, because they thought it was a false premise. But he is celebrating the fact that the Jewish people have no hope to return back to the land and build the second temple, as the prophets have said they would. I wouldn't go to such a party, Mordechai thought to himself, but he threw that party. And lo and behold, without the king having any intention to do so, he gets angry at the party. He kills his wife, Vashti. He ends up married to a new queen named Esther, who ends up saving the Jewish people. So you could say, in an ironic twist of events, the very party that was there to celebrate the fact that the Jewish situation was hopeless turned out to be the incident that enabled a new queen to take over, Esther, and it saved the Jewish people from physical destruction. And in fact, it was Esther's son who gave the Jews permission to rebuild the Second Temple. What an irony. What a strange turn of events. And this is what I just want to dig into up front whenever we think about Purim. Now, I've heard Jewish thinkers and rabbis say that this book of the Torah is the comedic relief. It's like in a serious Shakespeare play when the gravediggers come out and start talking and rambling with each other. It's finding a role for Falstaff or whoever you want to add to the script. Far be it from that being the case. The whole notion of Megillat Esther and the very reason that God's name is not mentioned, even though it really happened in the days of God, which of course are all days, but it happened specifically in those days as well, is because when you think about the story, the twists and turns and the events that took place were so carefully orchestrated, purposefully and meaningfully by God, that when you look at the whole story, it's irrefutable. And hence, by the way, we have a custom. When you go to shul and you see them read the Megillah, you'll see something unusual. We don't do this when we read the Torah. We don't do this when we read the prophets. But the halacha is, the Jewish law is that you take the Megillah and you roll out the entire Megillah on the table, and then you fold it up like a letter. Why do we do that? So one of the reasons given is because you can't appreciate the importance of Purim or the reading of this Megillah unless you look at the whole picture, unless you look at it from beginning to end. Otherwise, each and every incident, step, circumstance could be dismissed, happenstance, just so happened to be that way. But it's irrefutable that when you look at the whole picture, how did this story happen? So if you want to dismiss it, you say it's a comedy. Comedy is good. I like comedies. But if you want to give it a little more thought, and giving things more thought is a big issue to the Torah and to the Jewish way of life, then you reach an irrefutable conclusion that, wow, look how events can unfold that are just as miraculous as the Exodus from Egypt without God's fingerprints being on the page and without God's name appearing in the scroll. And yet it's there, a big lesson for life. So what does this mean? And this is relevant throughout the whole story, and we could talk about this all night, but I'll give you a simple example. It's clear that the Jewish people, if you would have taken a poll of the Jewish people, why did Haman decree to destroy the Jews? They would have overwhelmingly told you, well, he decreed it because you have this obstinate, very, very religious, ridiculous person named Mordecai who just won't acknowledge times have changed, won't keep up with things, won't acknowledge the fact that, hey, we're living in a foreign country and what these government officials do matter, and we need to pay attention to that, and we need to go with the flow, and we need to understand that when the New York or when the Shushan Times publishes an editorial about how important it is to have unity in the realm and how wrong it is for an individual's religious beliefs to stand in the way of upholding the majesty of the king, how destructive that is. That's front page news in the Shushan Times. And for us, we're certainly, when we experience a Purim, even only once, we're commanded to scratch our heads and say, nah, maybe not, or maybe absolutely not, because that's not the way the world works. And therefore, And if you think about it, what decision does Achashverosh, the king, really make? He goes with the flow. He's manipulated. People tell him, "Oh, what your wife did was terrible. Hang her." He hangs her. Haman says, "We have to wipe out the Jews." Okay, here's the ring. Go for it. Um, he goes to a party, and his queen says, "My people were threatened." You're kidding. Who could be doing that? Him. Hang him. All these events, even on their face, indicate Achashverosh is not a character. Achashverosh is putty in the hands of God Almighty. And what's the purpose? What is the purpose? So, what's the purpose? What's the consistent purpose of all human experience? It's to draw people close to God. It's to make us aware of God. And I fall back often on this definition of the word Yisrael, which is not the most commonly used explanation. But Yisrael means Am Sheroeh Kel, a nation, a people who perceive God. And to perceive God, you have to not perceive, or you have to cut through the noise. You have to cut through the superficiality. You have to dismiss many legitimate, reasonable viewpoints and then see past that to understand that we live in a world which God rules over. And that's where you get statements like Rav Yaakov Emden wrote 350 years ago, and how much more he would say, yell it today. There is no miracle comparable to the survival of the Jewish people. And if we ever have doubts about what we stand for, what we believe in, the importance of what we do as the Jewish people, our very existence answers the question. And you can see how this is what we're celebrating on Purim. Note, even though Achashverosh's name is mentioned dozens of times, and I didn't count them up, and even though seemingly he is in the driver's seat, he does not matter. That's a mistaken view. Just as Mordecai understood that bowing down to an idol bearing Haman, a descendant of Amalek, the sworn historic enemy of the Jewish people, is something which is never excusable and can't happen. So you have the king's viewpoint. I'm in charge. I'm running the show, the king Achashverosh. It's a joke. You have the secular viewpoint, or the this worldly viewpoint, which is, boy, why is this guy Mordecai creating so many problems for us? And then you have the viewpoint of those people who perceive God as having an active, meaningful place in the universe that God created, and everything comes into a different focus. Let's look at some examples. A dramatic moment in the Megillah. The king can't sleep all night. He asked, in order to help him sleep, bring me the Chronicles. I want to hear how great I am. And lo and behold, they read to him about Mordecai saving his life. He says, "Oh my goodness, he saved my life. What are we going to do about that? We owe him." A normal human, nice reaction of gratitude. At that moment, Haman appears. Okay, that's an odd thing. If Haman would have came 5 minutes later, maybe one of the king's assistants would have said, "Well, let's give him a $50,000 bonus and a vacation on the to Qatar." If Haman would have come 5 minutes earlier before they read that to the king, everything would have been different also. So, nerds, who's shaping history here? Who's calling the shots? do we really need God to come out from behind the curtain, so to speak? Like Shakespeare prancing out on the stage in the middle of a performance of Hamlet and say, "I wrote this. It's mine. This is mine. Isn't it great? Isn't this amazing? When you clap, clap for me." That's not God's style. And why isn't it God's style? Because God understands that those who seek God through reality, look for him, see what really matters, and discard what doesn't matter, those people are able to live lives that the Torah holds out we're responsible to lead. Give tzedakah. What give tzedakah? Are you kidding me? I need every penny I've got, said Bernard Baruch in the roaring 20s when he announced that he had become a millionaire. Keep Shabbos. Keep Shabbos. I mean, give me a break. I need a day off. I mean, I need a day to enjoy myself. All these things, everything runs in the face of some natural perspective that is reasonable, that makes sense, that could be put forward, that merits a little thought and attention, but then ultimately, as Jewish people, has to be held up in light of the Torah that God has given us as the eternal guidance and user's manual for the life that God has given us. And then we have to decide as individuals, as a community, as a people. Those are the choices we make. Those are big choices, and they really, really matter. And within that frame, you see there's no room for despair. Now, I want to emphasize here, despair is the cardinal adversary to doing good. And I think that needs to be underscored, and we all have to place that in front of our own consciousness. Does it really matter if I come out in the rain and give a class? Is anybody going to remember that? Does it make a difference? Does it really matter if I get up and go to shul? Does it really matter whether I've given away 7.25% of my income this year, or whether I fulfilled what the Torah asks of me that I give away 10%? Does it really make a difference? I mean, I'm not that rich. It's not like the guy, it's not like Bloomberg, who gave away $3.7 billion to charity in 2024. Yeah, he should give 10% or more, because after all, that makes a difference. But my $30,000-$40,000 a year that I give, who are you kidding? Does it really matter? Will anybody notice if I stop doing it? Does God even care? And the answer is, it depends how you see the world. It depends whether the world is a spiritual place and a person is a spiritual being, and your soul matters more in the long term than your physical existence matters, or not. And that's really what Purim represents to us. That's what the Megillah is all about. And hence, here's a simple interpretation. You look at chapter 6, sentence 1. This is really the turning point in the Megillah. It's in the back of the stone Chumash on page 1257, if you want to see it. And it's a very famous moment. B'layla hahi nadada shnas hamelech. The night the king couldn't sleep. We were just talking about it. So, what does the Maharal say? He says, 1 second, we're not talking about Chashverosh not being able to sleep. Are you kidding me? He couldn't sleep. He couldn't sleep. They read him a book. They didn't read him a book. What difference does that make? He says, that's clearly only talking about God. HaMelech, just like we say on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. HaMelech refers to God. And God couldn't sleep. Why couldn't God sleep? Because God knew this is the moment of intervention. This is the moment when the fasting and the prayers and the supplication and the finally hard-won realization on the part of the Jewish people that they couldn't blame all their problems on Mordechai's obstinance or on a sense of vagaries and circumstances or geopolitical issues, or wouldn't it have been better if the Babylonians would have defeated the Persians, and wouldn't it have been better if the Greeks would come along and defeat the Persians already? All this kind of stuff, all this speculation. No, God couldn't sleep because, wow, the Jewish people are fasting. They're praying, even though it's not written out in the Megillah, because that's not The story has to be thought through, and you have to look for it. So God couldn't sleep. So God was tossing and turning. God was saying, okay, it's time for this script to flip. And we see this if we only stop following the news minute by minute on a 24/7 news cycle. And I've said this before in this class. Just think for a second. We're going through terrible, terrible, terrible times. But the Jewish people have amazingly defeated such overwhelming forces that surrounded them on all sides, and an array of missiles and weapons, which nobody before in history has ever defended themselves from. Okay, we've suffered tremendous tragedies and tremendous losses, and it's troubling to us. But if you ask me, is there going to be a Jewish future? And that's a question that we always deep within ourselves ask ourselves, is there a Jewish future? Does it matter what education my kid receives? Does it matter whether we schlep in to go to this kid's bar mitzvah on the East Coast because it's our way of showing him how proud we are of his Jewish accomplishments and achievements and attainments? And the answer on our part has to be a resounding yes. And I think if you look into the writings of the Chafetz Chaim, written between the 1880s and he passed away in 1932, 1933, I'm not sure, I think 33. He constantly reminds people life is meaningful. Choices you make every day are meaningful. Sing an extra tune at the Shabbos table. Spend on a nicer bottle of wine for Yom Tov. Invite that lonely person to your Seder. It really matters. And by doing so, our lives, our story of our lives become rewritten, and they become very spiritual. And this idea of despair, let's turn our attention briefly to this week's Torah reading Ki Tisa. And of course, it famously at the center has the sin of the golden calf. What provokes it? Page 484 in the Art Scroll Chumash. What did the Jewish people say? Kum aseh lanu Elohim asher yelchu lefonenu. Let's get up. You, Aaron, get up. Make for us a God who could walk in front of us. Why? Kizeh Moshe ha'ish, because this man, Moshe, this human being who we've become too dependent on and whom we've forgotten is God's representative to us, but instead we see him as the ultimate leader. Well, Yadanu Mahayava, we don't know what happened to him. Oh my goodness. I'm filled with fright. There's no future. We're lost. We're in the desert. We don't know north, south, east, or west. We just stood at Mount Sinai. God just gave us a Torah. Moshe left the elders behind in charge. We have Aaron in front of us, and famously, what does the Torah say? The Torah says, Zichru Torah Moshe. Let's remember the Torah that Moshe gave us, not Moshe himself. That's why we don't know where he's buried. Because Moshe, yes, he takes on immense spiritual importance in the world, but he doesn't live beyond 120. He doesn't represent our only connection to God. And yet the people despaired, and they despaired because he was a day late. It's literally something you see every day. When you see the kid in the front office of school crying, and it's 10 minutes after dismissal, and the kid says, "My mommy's not here yet." And you realize deep down, what is that kid thinking? Oh, maybe there was an accident. Maybe something, God forbid, happened. Maybe my mother's forgotten about me. Maybe she's run off with some other guy. I mean, they're not that sophisticated. They don't think that way, thank God. But the idea is the same. Maybe I'm lost. Maybe I'm abandoned. Maybe my life doesn't matter. Maybe there's just no hope. This is something which, we kid ourselves if we don't acknowledge the extent to which such ideas shape who we are. And of course, what happened then, one group of people said, well, let's make a god who'll take us back to Egypt. Are you kidding? Go back to Egypt? Yeah, let's go back to Egypt. At least we'll know where we are. Another group, let's worship it. Worship it. I mean, nobody was intending to worship it. We didn't worship Moshe. We didn't bow down to Moshe. If we need a replacement for Moshe, why would we worship it? And yet they end up worshiping it. So you see that this despair, this sense of abandonment, which we all know is so natural part of human nature, it's something we have to, just like perceiving God through the events of the world, as the Megillah teaches us, we have to perceive and develop a consistent connection to God, which involves some trust and some faith to the best way we can. None of us are perfect. And for each of us, our faith at times fails us. There's always the March Madness Friday night game that my favorite player, who I've been following since he was in the 7th grade, is playing in. And maybe this is an occasion where I don't have to keep the Shabbos. Okay, because after all, what difference does it make? Or does it really? Or what really is, or is it? And if it was really God's world, he wouldn't have had the game on Friday night. The guy would have lost in the last round. Whoever, I mean, a million ideas come into our heads all the time, which justify a sense that we're entitled to see the world and push God out of the picture every now and then, or at least give us a break. And the truth is, you have to give yourself a break, because every now and then we don't measure up. But we need to try to. It's an interesting thing. The Vilna Gaon writes, I was very surprised to read this, that he said that when a moment when faith fails him, take out Megillas Esther and read it. Now, again, in the view of some people, it's like, well, let's watch an hour of Seinfeld or Gaffick and laugh our guts out. Okay, my faith has abandoned me. At least I relaxed. I'm more okay. I feel like it's okay. I've anesthetized myself to the seriousness of life. I can get a good night's sleep, and hopefully tomorrow I'll do better. No, let's pull out Megillas Esther and realize how the pieces really fit together and how no individual takes anything away from us, because that's all in God's hands. And nobody steps on my toes without God literally seeing to it that his foot hits them. That's the way life works. I'll just get back to Shabbos for a minute. We say something audacious on Shabbos. When you look at Psalm 92, which is the song about Shabbos, it says, people don't perceive this. Fools and coarse people, they don't even perceive this. But if you open your eyes, you'll see, Bifroach Rishoim Kmo Esev, Nihisham Doma Deyad. There's a pattern in the world. Evilness grows like grass. It just bursts out of the ground, and it looks green and lush and successful and powerful, and it's going to last forever. And then it withers away before you know it. And it's gone. And we've all seen that in our own lifetimes over and over and over again. And yet it doesn't register, because we don't take the space, the time of Shabbos, to really gather this perspective, to really unroll the whole Megillah right in front of us and look at it from beginning to end and catch our breath. And a lot within us doesn't even want us to do that, because that's the hurly-burly of life. Keep at it. Don't miss this report. Oh, do you know what just happened in the north of it? Do you know what just happened in the south? Oh, they're meeting here in this Arab country, and the Russians are visiting with the Turks, and blah, blah, blah. A million things are happening. And how can we not just eat our kishkas out, paying attention to all these things? Let's switch back to the Parsha for a second. This week's Torah reading describes the Luchot, even though they get broken, but Moshe comes down from the mount with these tablets of law. And it says, Michtov Elokim hu charus al haluchos. The writing of God was inscribed into the stone. And the rabbis come up with a simple question. All writing is cut into stone. That's what tablets are about. What does that have to tell us? It's scratched, it's cut into the stone. So it can't mean that. So they say, what does it mean? The word harus, which means to be cut into, interestingly in Hebrew also means herut, to be free, to be emancipated, to not be beholden to someone else. So therefore the rabbis say, if you really want to be free, study Torah. Well, whoa. Study Torah. Good evening. Hi. Thank you for coming. What do you mean study Torah and be free? Free. I'm the guy who can't watch the basketball game on the Friday night with my favorite player going on. I'm the one who can't eat at this restaurant or can't go here and can't do this and has to be in shul all day Yom Kippur fasting and all this kind of stuff. What are you talking about? Freedom. So in an interesting insight, one of the Rosh Yeshivas of the Telz Yeshiva from a generation ago, and I don't remember his name right now, says, what's the difference between a slave and a free person? So some people say, well, a slave works really, really hard, and a free person doesn't work really, really hard. And that's not true. Plenty of free people work really, really hard. We see today people worth hundreds of billions of dollars, something we can't even imagine computing. And they're up at 5 o'clock in the morning working, and they're up late at night, and they're hustling, and they're traveling, and they're making meetings, and they're doing all kinds of things. It says it's not a question of how hard you work. It's ultimately a slave understands that everything that I earn ends up in someone else's pocket. Yeah, I can survive, but on a subsistence level, but ultimately I'm not working for myself. A free person realizes that to whatever extent I succeed, it's mine. It's mine. And then you scratch your head and think about it. So if I'm working day and night in order to experience a moment in this world, which we know is fleeting, am I really working for myself? As compared to someone who's working just as hard, maybe even harder, but the benefit is going to stay with that person forever. It's going to be theirs. It's going to become incorporated into their being and who they are. Flying first class doesn't change who you are when you get off the plane. Yeah, you feel more rested, but it doesn't make you into somebody else. Becoming more humble, becoming more caring, becoming more respectful, tuning into having an active relationship with Hashem throughout your life, it changes who you are, and therefore you ultimately own it. It's who you are. That's what it means that the study of Torah sets you free. And God forbid, I'm not mimicking the Nazis here, but that's what the rabbis tell us. It sets us free because then what we're working for is something which we get to keep, and it has lasting value for us. And it doesn't slide away. It doesn't require me to be bragging to other people about it. But it's really mine. It's really a game changer. And then you get to this idea, and we'll close with this, drinking on Purim. Okay, you got to drink. And, everybody says more or less. I'm on the less side. And we all know how dangerous it is to drink too much. What happens when you drink too much? You say things that are hurtful. You say things that you regret. You say things that you probably really think, at least some of the time, deep within yourself. But they're not things that you wouldn't ever say otherwise, right? So, what's the idea of drinking? The idea is, so what really is important to you? Drink a little bit, not ostentatiously, and then don't run around, dancing on tables and telling everybody what you think about them. But see what thoughts come out of your own recesses of your consciousness. Evaluate how much your faith and your belief and your trust in God are real to you and meaningful to you. And why do that? So that you can go on building again on the inspiration of Purim, not to knock yourself down or tear yourself down, but rather to take an assessment on this special day when no matter how much God hides, we see through the mask. And no matter how much we spend on our costume, somehow or other people know who we really are. So we may as well find out ourselves who we really are and evaluate it. And go forward with the idea that ultimately Abraham was chosen, as we say in the prayers every morning. Matzata et levavo ne'eman lefanecha. God found his heart trustworthy, trusting, faithful, in a very, very deep way, in a way which proved test after test after test to seemingly be unbreakable. And please God, we should take all these lessons from Purim and from this week's Torah reading, and we should become much less fragile human beings. We should become more unbreakable. And most important of all, when we look out at another person, at the world around us, at the way consider how other people think about us, whatever you want to look at, open your eyes wide, and you'll see the great extent to which Hashem is there. Please God, we should all have the joy and experience of Purim that fulfills these aspirations.